Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Tokenize This. I'm your host this week, Andrew Vijunas. We have a special guest this week, the Wulf Kaal. He's a professor of law at St. Thomas University and a subject matter expert at the intersection of law and blockchain. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Joining us remotely, we have one of our very own legal advisors, a title attorney often found blazing new trails in blockchain and real estate, Wes Williams. Welcome. So you're an expert in the intersection of law and blockchain, right? And you've been giving a lot of talks about the subject. What do you see as hot topics right now in the space?
To me, right now, super hot is Hester Pierce's announcement and her talking in LA about a month ago about, quote, the technological evolution and innovation should not be, quote, hindered by the lacking imagination of the regulators.
Yeah.
So to me, this is a real game changer for her to say that. Now, I'm assuming that she said it and it was vetted, and I'm assuming that based on this statement that there will be additional implementation efforts by this SEC staff that we'll see over the summer. And if that's true, that's very exciting news for American crypto startups.
So she basically said that she doesn't think that the regulators should be interfering with or stifling the technology. I think the analogy she uses is being a lifeguard on...
Exactly, you read it. Yeah, exactly. So it's the lifeguard analogy, and what does that mean? Well, the lifeguard is not in the water all the time, right? They only jump if somebody is sinking. So let's have them focus on the sinking ships and passengers. But let's the rest of the shipping industry, if you want, flourish, right? In this analogy.
So what do you see are some of the sinking ships right now? Is it some of these scam ICOs, or what do you think are some?
I mean, if you run an ICO in the United States as an unregistered security, I mean, you don't have to be surprised if the SEC says, no. So that those are. But then again, there's some enforcement actions that also. So for instance, the Munchie enforcement action, where the SEC is basically saying, well, if you're doing this in the United States, it's an unregistered security, that's illegal. But at the same time, indirectly, arguably, some lawyers are arguing that now, and I actually, to some extent, agree with that. It's an endorsement, the way they wrote it, of the SAFT. Right? So it's a Reg A plus, SAFT or SAFT-E. They have not said in those enforcement actions that those things are not the way forward. Right? So in a way, by picking certain cases and enforcing the outright problems, in some ways they may be construed to be endorsing other solutions.
You can almost say that they're kind of corralling the market in a general way where they want it. Okay.
Right, exactly.
So when you talk about these ICOs being regulated or security offerings, how much of that do you think is a function of the purpose of the ICO in which they're trying to raise funds to build a business versus maybe currency issue is not to raise funds, but rather to it's a developed currency that just comes to market.
So the SEC is all about investor protection, right? So we have to ask ourselves, what is and it's always, I teach federal securities regulation, right? So it's about the ability to fend for yourself. Yeah, that's the sort of stereotypical way of looking at this. So investors who quote unquote can fend for themselves, accredited investors, QUIPs, all these, that's not what the SEC worries about. The SEC is worrying about moms and pops. Now, obviously moms and pops are not really engaged in the ICO space too much at this point, but we're getting there. I don't know if you've seen there's some statistics that say over 40% of millennials are now owning cryptocurrencies. I think that's so. And not all of them are qualified investors.
Right. So they're just seeing their friends make all this money, and they're like, okay, let's jump on the bandwagon.
So the SEC, their job is to protect those that cannot fend for themselves and to avoid quote-unquote market frenzy. Now, what we've seen in 2017, that's getting pretty close to market frenzy, right? So of course the SEC has that mandate, but at the same time, it's about whether people can fend for themselves. So to the extent that people come to it as accredited investors, there is no reason for the SEC to be involved, unless there's outright fraud in that environment. Yeah, but to the extent that we see the average investors, the retail market, the retailization, if you want. So if this is becoming a retail market, we had the same in the hedge fund industry, by the way. Huge, 20 years back and forth. Who's a retail investor? Who's not? Can hedge fund products be sold to retail investors? And then the SEC started going after them. You know, in 2003 we had increased hedge fund fraud. So I'm analogizing crypto markets now with what's happened in the past.
It's a fair,
right. And so huge back and forth, and you know I've written about this a lot 10 years ago. And so then there was a discourse with Congress where actually in the Goldman case the SEC lost. The DC circuit actually in those days said that the SEC didn't have the authority to come after these hedge funds and force them to register. And so I see similar dynamics here in some ways, but you know the market is still really nascent, very early stages. So given what Hester Pierce said, so back to where I started, I'm getting pretty excited for America. You know, I don't want to get too patriotic about this, but 2 years ago, it really looked like the Russians and other Europeans were doing what we did in the United States during the internet years, 94 forward, right?
Yeah.
It really looked like that. Now, there's some statistics that say we still have 40% of all crypto startups worldwide are based in the United States. So that's good news, but that's also counting sort of a big corporation internal attempts to play with the technology. Exactly. So having said that, if the signals that we're seeing right now, if this is materializing and the SEC staff is supporting that in guidance over the next 4 months or so after during the summer, that's very exciting to me.
Yeah. Well, and Wes, I know that you had some questions on decentralized models and how to police those. So since Wulf drew the comparison between, say, hedge funds and regulating those, I think that was kind of easier, right? Because you go after centralized institutions. You had some questions about the decentralized aspect of it all.
Right. Well, I just getting back to the topic of the ICOs, I was curious, Wulf. I've seen a trend of more individuals in the space really wanting the SEC to regulate these things as securities, and they're pushing for these security token offerings, and they're pushing for these types of things. But I'm also curious as to your thoughts on Ethereum. We never really got a clear guidance from the SEC on whether or not they were going to bring any sort of enforcement action against Ethereum. But when they did their ICO, and now that their network is built out, do you see a potential for these tokens to morph into more of a utility? I mean, I see that with Ether right now as being the fuel to fuel smart contracts. So it has a utility value, but then again, they use it for a means to fundraise at the beginning. So what do you see?
So let me just go back to basics. Jay Clayton, chairman of the SEC, quote, "I yet have to see one token offering that is not a security." So if we go with that, and people they love this idea of this is clearly utility, and all the SEC will cut us slack and all that. Based on these pronouncements, the safe bet, I would never advise anybody to go in and assume that they can get away with the assumption of being a utility. Now, I know there are law firms that are charging really serious money to write legal memos that may be maybe valid for a week or so, arguing that under the SEC Howey test, that XYZ could be construed as a utility token. Now, I would never advise anybody to spend money on that, and excuse me to all the lawyers who are seeing this, I think, but back to the question, should the SEC's pronounce rules that make this a securities offering, and should there be rules that regulate that to create certainty for the market? Now, when do markets flourish? Well, they flourish if there's legal certainty. Do we have legal certainty? No, we don't. But at the same time, so the SEC regulates through uncertainty. I think that's a fair statement, right? So they keep things ambiguous. They don't provide a lot of guidance to keep people on their toes to not do the wrong thing, right? So first of all, if you now say there should be mandatory rules for token offerings as securities, there's a real question as to whether the SEC can do this alone, whether there may have to be congressional authority for that. That's one issue. And I'm not saying it's either or, but that's something to think about. The other issue in this context may be that if you provide a framework, now you provide legal certainty, but at the same time, you may not be fully understanding from a cost-benefit analysis perspective, and the SEC does that now, they have a very clear mandate for cost-benefit analysis. You may not understand the side effects of the intended rules because you don't fully understand the market. And the SEC, in many conversations that I had with them, repeatedly say, we would like to wait until the market matures to an extent that we actually understand what the market does and where the market is going. Yeah, and that's actually a pretty that's a reasonable way to handle it. Now, at the same time, if years go by, we don't get any certainty in the United States on how this should be done, right? So it's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
Another question: once the network is built out and a centralized top-down organization thereby becomes decentralized, meaning that you have all these participants within this ecosystem now, how do regulators, how do they regulate or enforce regulations against large decentralized ecosystems?
So I think you're going after regulatory arbitrage. Is that what you're suggesting?
Right.
That is for all these rules that could be implemented. It's a decentralized economy. So to the extent, and I believe that regulatory arbitrage exists, people can argue against it any way they want, but to the extent that people see that there are more beneficial rules in other jurisdictions that benefit them in incorporating and don't restrict them individually with in personam jurisdiction in the United States, why wouldn't they go into that jurisdiction? So we've seen it with Thailand, we've seen it with Singapore, we've even seen it with Switzerland. I have had so many contacts, clients, friends who literally are saying to me, Wulf, take care, in the States, I'm moving to Europe. This is it for me. I have no interest in this exposure. I believe in crypto. I just don't believe in crypto in the United States. Now, I can't do that. I have a family in Chicago. Yeah? So, but yeah, regulatory arbitrage, I mean, there's no way around it. Now, back to Hester Pierce's statement. Why might she be saying that? Well, maybe there is a realization that the United States, jobs in Texas, right? So if we attract these companies in the United States, people are staying here. What do we get? Well, even the government gets we're all getting jobs in Texas, right? So maybe now that Goldman Sachs is having a bridge coin / stablecoin issue, they bought Poloniex, Facebook is doing it. Maybe now there's a realization that this is really mainstream, and yet we're losing a lot of our top talent in this area to Europe and other Asia and other places, right? So to me, one might even argue that she said this because there's now a vetted understanding with the SEC, and I have no internal knowledge of this. I'm speculating here. Vetted understanding within the SEC that regulatory arbitrage is something that actually could be a detriment in the United States. So if we believe that the crypto market can be the next NASDAQ, right? If we don't build something that creates an ounce of reliability and legal certainty in this, we simply may not get the NASDAQ, the next NASDAQ in crypto in the United States, right? And so maybe we're seeing a realization that regulatory arbitrage is actually real, and maybe we see some level of reaction. I really have my hopes up for the rest of the summer that we get more guidance in this context.
Well, what I've noticed, it's interesting, is a lot of these centralized organizations that are working within the decentralized blockchain space, they're all being proactive as far as complying with state, money transmitter laws. I'm speaking of exchanges now, complying with money transmitter laws and any other federal federal regulations through FinCEN, know your customer requirements, AML requirements, things of that nature. And I heard that Coinbase is now applying for a banking license. So they're all taking steps to
and moving to Chicago, apparently. Well, that's the last thing I heard.
Right. So they're all taking these steps to comply with with these licensing requirements and regulatory standards. What's going to happen? A centralized organization actually becomes a decentralized ecosystem where they're no longer a top-down centralized organization anymore. What happens to those licensing and regulatory requirements? Can states bring enforcement actions for non-compliance against these decentralized? See, that's where I'm having the problem with. I don't understand how regulators are going to be able to regulate these things.
Okay, so I think we all in this channel, most of us believe in the crypto evolution, right? So how do we get to a full evolution of the technology? Can we assume that it's possible to get critical mass buy-in by the average consumer without making initial centralized compromises that lead to future decentralized evolution? That's really at the heart of this. Meaning, don't we have to accept that we are still working in a centralized environment? I mean, any exchange that's centralized, so the Krakens, the Poloniex, they're all centralized, that are not the Ether deltas of the world. They all are subject to those rules, right? And they provide a valuable evolutionary service for crypto because they attract users, and they provide a service that, with centralized measures and centralized technologies, that ultimately bring in more people to crypto. And in that sense, they provide a valuable service. But they still have to, in being centralized, they have to comply with the centralized power structures that are running the country, right? So in that sense, that to me, that's if I'm a purist, I don't want that. Okay, but realistically, you can't have the evolution unless you take incremental steps, and those are the incremental steps. Yeah. Now, ultimately, to me, the more people are using it, and the more the technology flourishes, and the more we create peer-to-peer solutions, they cannot be created upfront without making compromises. Now, there are a lot of people in Washington to whom I talk, and in certain developer circles, that are saying, no, we know what these people want. They are going to start strangleholding us, that we cannot give in to that. And I used to think that 2 years ago. I changed my mind. I believe that we have to, anything that is an incremental step that allows the crypto evolution, meaning more consumers to buy in, that's a good thing. That's a good thing that leads ultimately to a decentralized solution that we cannot even envision right now. So to me, all these steps are necessary. Now, are people going to hurt? Yeah, oh no doubt. Yeah, so some people will be taken out. There's no question about that. But ultimately, to me, it leads to a better future.
Yeah, and I think, to Wes's point too on the decentralization, right now and to your point with the incremental steps, we're kind of building almost like a new floating landmass, and all the passengers are kind of coming on board. So right now, those centralized institutions like the exchanges, those are kind of like the on and off ramps into this world. So that's what obviously the regulation is targeting right now, and it makes sense because that's how you do it. But once it actually starts getting big enough, at some point you kind of cast it off, and it goes off into the sunset. And I think this is a good segue into reputational systems, because like you mentioned, accreditation and can you fend for yourself, and that's based on a trustless system where we didn't have something like blockchain that can enforce meritocracy and enforce reputational systems that can't be forged, right? So I think that would be interesting to kind of talk about. So as the market evolves, I would see an increased need for things like Samata, which I know is near and dear to your heart, of course.
That's why we do it.
Yeah. So you can see like where you start hand in hand in cooperation with regulators. I'm not trying to promote a certain business model for you, but while regulators are still having a duty with the on and off ramps, you're helping people build reputation that they can then carry into this new system and work from there.
So let me do a quick summary. This is very early stage. So most people who know about reputation systems and decentralized autonomous systems that are anonymous, as soon as you mention reputation solutions, they shut down because it hasn't worked in the past, right? There are a lot of problems that all these reputation systems are subjected to that haven't been resolved. But let me back off. Okay, so so what do we have? We have Satoshi, Bitcoin is first generation, Ethereum is 2015, second generation. Now we have all these platforms that are trying to be third generation, scalable solutions. So EOS, very close to my heart. Those guys, they're also Midwestern, out of St. Louis, OCI. Neo, Cardano, NEM, there are all kinds of solutions, but they're all third generation in that they're trying to get to scalable enterprise-facing solutions. That's great. But if we believe in the evolution of crypto, and that's where I'm coming from with Samada, if we believe that with scalability comes an increasing use of smart contracting, with an increasing use of smart contracting comes encryptions, and so we have Monero, we have Zcash, where I would personally argue there is no way that people can ever break that. That a judge, a federal judge, could haul somebody into court in breaking the encryption, the anonymization that's based on a Monero Zcash transaction. So at the same time, so let's assume they're all anonymous, yeah, and there are huge benefits that come from that. I would actually argue that we can overcome human nature by way of anonymization, because how are you discriminating against somebody in commerce if you don't know who they are? Yeah, but and here's the kicker. So talk about legal certainty, right? So if we assume that these smart contracting transactions, they're exponential right now and they will continue to be exponentially and exponentially adopted. If we believe that this is continuing, then we have to create some sort of trust factor by which we can judge counterparties. Yeah. Now, if it's anonymous and decentralized and autonomous, what are we judging people on in order to judge whether we should do commerce with them or not? I believe there is no way around reputational systems. Now, people are shying away from it because nobody has figured out Sybil attack, Majority attack, all these corruptions. DOS attacks. I mean, the list is endless. If you want to see, I think we've addressed all the attacks that I can currently see in the Samada technical white paper. So back to my earlier point, how do you create trust other than through reputation-specific verification procedures in anonymous, decentralized, and autonomous systems? I don't see a way forward for distributed digital commerce. How is it? There is nothing else that I can see. Now, there are different people working on different protocols, of course, but reputation is a way to solve these issues. Now, let me tell you this: reputation can also, by way of in the Samada structure does it that way, weighted DAX. Yeah, by way of weighted DAX, we can create a precedent system. And a precedent system in the legal sense, meaning I don't have Supreme Court top-down hierarchical structures that dictate who does what under what circumstances in which jurisdiction. We don't have that. What we have is a decentralized autonomous system with reputation verification in a weighted DAC that allows a precedent system. So think of it very simply. So if somebody creates a smart contracting protocol and posts it on Samada and claims that this is an ideal protocol, an ideal code for XYZ solution, and that's verified on the Samada platform, and people start using that protocol, that person being right on Samada increases his or her reputation stake, and hence creates precedent for that expertise tag on Samada. That's precedent. That is legal precedent. So other people are following this precedent that this person set, and because other people are following it, that person is gaining higher reputation stakes. So we have an incentive alignment by which we're creating precedent. On that, you can build an intra-crypto legal system. And I believe that's necessary. And I believe that's necessary because Zcash and Monero type transactions, if something goes wrong in those smart contracting transactions, a judge right now, technically under existing legal in the existing legal infrastructure, has technically what is called in law in personam jurisdiction. Technically, yes. So all lawyers who are listening to this, you are right. There is in personam jurisdiction, practically impossible to enforce. Monero and Zcash, there is no way that this judge ever, it doesn't matter how much money they throw at this. Now, there's certain AI systems that are trying to experiment with tracing and so forth. In those transactions, it's impossible to determine who the person is. If it's impossible, the existing legal infrastructure has no role in that crypto legal future, sorry, in that crypto economic and commercial future. That means we have to create something intra-crypto that creates legal certainty and precedent. I believe that can be Samara.
Yeah, and Wes, this makes perfect sense, like ideologically as well, when we talk about blockchain being the great democratizer of all things. The reputation is going to be the only way. I agree with you completely. That it's in a fully decentralized manner. That's the only way you can really manage and self-govern that system.
Well, you can also use it for nefarious and dictatorial type sense too. You have countries didn't China say they were going to utilize some sort of reputation system with respect to their citizenry, and then you can exclude certain classes of individuals because they're not falling in line with the government ideology, so to speak.
Okay, so I want to say this first because we get this a lot when we present Samara. There is no aggregation. People have reputations that are tree specific. Yeah. So whatever reputation you have in validating or proposing smart contracting protocols does not carry over to the expertise tag where you're building sheds or something, right? Meaning you don't get an aggregated reputation score. So the reputation doesn't become your identity. Yeah, they don't aggregate. They're separated. Yeah, so you only have a reputation pertaining to the expertise and the truth that you're adding in your expertise tag in that level of expertise tag. Yeah.
So Wes, like in our case, I would imagine if you're tokenizing buildings in California and San Francisco and residential properties using a trust vehicle, you might have a reputational score for delivering quality tokens of that type. That doesn't necessarily make you an expert or give you any extra points for doing something in Venezuela or in Chicago.
In Chicago, that's exactly right.
Different
because
set of
you
laws.
know the market in California, and I would even argue in Orange County or something.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you can do the same in LA, and so forth.
Or if you start doing another completely different asset class or jurisdiction, like supply chain inventories or mineral rights, it's not like you can just carry things over. You have to start building it from scratch. And I think that's a true meritocracy. It's really what blockchain was meant for.
And it's inflationary, meaning if you don't use it, you can't just assume that it sits there and holds power, right? If you don't show that you're right, that your expertise carries reputational weight and truth, quote unquote, it dissipates over time. Yeah, so you have to be right most of the time consistently in order to maintain your reputation score in that specific tree expertise tag. Yeah? That's the idea. And guys, we are very early with Samara. We consider it a fourth generation infrastructure product. We love to work with the third generation folks.
Like us?
No, I don't mean it that way. We're looking for partnerships. We're looking, we're still team building to some extent. So, and this is something we initially, you get sort of energized by the hype. You talk to certain people. I talked at the World Economic Forum, and it was all blockchain this year. Mm-hmm. And you think, it has to happen now. No. So one step at a time. I know a lot of people get really hyped up about this. But we've just worked 2 years on just creating the intellectual framework for it, the mathematics, the architecture, anything that goes into it. And those things take time, they take conversations, and you can't just put a bunch of engineers together and throw things together. Unfortunately, there's a lot of projects where we see that, where people think that you can just take this template and copy paste it and all that. We're trying to be a little bit more careful here.
Yeah, so and I think the step-by-step, the iterations, we're following a path very similar to what you described with the SEC. So we've got a little bit of centralization up front to make sure that there's quality bearer assets being put on deposit, that'll back the currency and back it in full faith. So just like the SEC, we're kind of regulating it, but as it grows, we want to pull those circuit breakers out. We want to remove those decentralization pieces. So I think
Centralization pieces.
or remove the centralizations. Correct. Thank you. So I would see Samata at some point playing side by side and validating, basically starting to build those reputational systems for people that are participating in the system, and based on, in the beginning, whether they were right by our ruling, they start building reputation, and then that way they can take over for management of the system. And I think it's very elegant. It's a really great way to do it. So
thank you. Yeah, I mean, we can. The more people use it, the more we can show the power of it, and the better it will evolve as an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited about it.
Yeah. Well, we can't wait to get it part of our platform, right, Wes?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how much time we have, but I have a few other questions for you. I know you're very much an advocate of attorneys like myself learning how to code smart contracts because you see that as a potential disruption. Well, in the future, attorneys will become what knowledge agents, I think you said is the term that you used. And correct me if I'm wrong, but so I started down the path of trying to understand and learn code, but I've got a lot of my colleagues out there saying, "Oh, that's just blockchain." Yeah.
They're all
You're crazy.
up now. You wait. Well, as I said, we are very early, especially as lawyers. It's a very conservative industry, as you know. Precedent, top-down type industry. So this concept of decentralization, that's something, arguably law is one of the most centralized things that you can put your head, try to wrap your head around. Because it all goes back to congressional and or constitutional / Supreme Court rulemaking, right? So I teach coding for lawyers, and I have to tell you, I'm blown away how quickly. Now I have to tell you, my students, I'm breeding them a little bit because they take certain courses first, and then they come into coding for lawyers, and that's when the real magic happens. In that they start seeing that they can create coded solutions for legal problems that are more efficient than what we have currently, right? And so it's really amazing. So about halfway through the course, they start waking up, and then they build teams, and they talk to their coding buddies. And so the assignment in class is you need to come up with code that compiles. So we're doing Solidity right now, for now, right? So that compiles, that creates a legal solution for something that is a legal problem. That's what they have to do. That's the last assignment. Yeah. So they have to explain and walk us through the code, all the functions, everything, and explain why that code creates a legal solution. And the reason why I make them do this, now this is, they don't understand the depth of the mathematics that underlies all of this, of course not, right? That would be several additional courses. And I'm actually thinking about teaching coding for lawyers too, that tries to go in much deeper. We're not there yet. Maybe I'll start teaching it in Europe next year, early next year. But anyway, so what we do is we set the students up that way, and the purpose is that they understand that these legal solutions are possible, and somebody somehow at some point in time will start doing this. Because they already know it's possible. Now, is the code perfect? No, it's not. Are there bugs in the code? Absolutely. Yeah, but it compiles, and it creates something that they had to think about in terms of creating something that's suboptimal in the existing legal system. So they understand that these solutions are available and that somebody will start implementing them at some point. And they can interact with those people because they've done the core work themselves, the conceptual work, including the code, right? And so that means they actually speak the language. They can think decentralized, they can think decentralized law, and they can talk to the experts. And that's what I want from them. And for them. And let me tell you, there are quite a few crypto startups that have started recruiting my students just because they had that exposure. They understand what this means. They're legally trained in the existing centralized systems, and that's still necessary, right? But at the same time, they understand what's happening in the decentralized future and with existing decentralized solutions. Yeah.
Are they thinking in terms of governance, how to coordinate the activity of a large group of individuals to, act in a way that benefits these economic ecosystems? I mean, similar to how Bitcoin was created when Satoshi came up with proof of work through the incentivization model. Are attorneys now having to think about these things as well? How to create a system to really coordinate the activities of large numbers of people in a direction that's positive, that's going to benefit the ecosystem, rather than try to game the system, so to speak?
I think your question goes towards how do we create governance solutions for future DAOs? Is that about? Yeah. Okay. So, and let me tell you, this is very exciting for me. I am about to finish with my dear friend and co-founder Craig Calcaterra the Samada blockchain governance, so DAO governance paper, where we really take philosophically, mathematically, this paper is the attempt to show how you can evolutionarily create DAO structures that are not forced into soft or hard forks, right? All the terrible things, the terrible centralized things that we're doing right now, where an elite group of developers with quote unquote the most knowledge, right, the most connections, and so forth, are making completely centralized protocol changes for everybody else in the system. Yeah, that is unacceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable, and we all do it. Every single system out there does it. I know names, okay, but they all do it. And so for us, autonomous systems, that's what Samana is about. We have no control over this, okay? To me, it's about evolutionary, anticipatory and evolutionary protocols that allow an evolutionary protocol evolution for DAOs. Yeah, and there are a lot of people who, Vitalik just 2 days ago published a paper where he talks about quadratic voting, and says that he's very concerned. He knows that there's no future for crypto without that, right? That is something I love Vitalik, but I don't know if quadratic voting is enough, and I think he knows that. So it has to be an evolutionary system, and there are a lot of people working on this, and we're publishing this probably before the Tulip conference, and we're talking to EOS actively about this. So EOS governance leader is Thomas Cox, very good, very receptive about these types of problems. So we'll publish it and then have a conversation with those folks at Tulip. And yeah, but back to your question. So lawyers, I mean, this is core. So I'm a economist and lawyer, and I've written this with a mathematician. At the core of this is an attempt to create a legal solution for DAO governance systems. Yeah? And lawyers, which goes to your question, lawyers really that's the expertise that lawyers should have. Yeah? To figure out what governance systems work, how should they work in the future. And so far, we've only seen computer scientists deal with these issues. So the Aragon paper, there's Open Bazaar, there's all kinds of stuff out there, right? Mostly computer scientists, not lawyers, that are doing this. So my students, I'm hoping that I can instill in them this notion that we have DAOs, they work, they've been limitedly successful in the past, as we all know, but now we have donation DAOs trying to fix some of the code. And so the students who can code and have legal training. Now you might say, well, how good is that legal training if it's centralized? Well, it still teaches you basic governance ideas and principles, precedent-setting principles, and that you can apply in this environment. I'll stop here. Sorry, I keep talking.
No, you're fine. Keep going. I'm listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely exciting stuff, especially from the amount of time, for example, even we as a startup. Us lowly third generation crypto guys.
I didn't mean it that way.
I'm just giving you flack now. But the amount of time we spent even in our own custom protocol for the voting mechanism to allow the currency users to self-govern the rules of their currency, it takes away from I think, the additional work we could have put into other parts of the protocol. So I think by partnering with Samata, there's these new companies coming into the space, they can spend less time worrying about governance and reputational systems, and that's the way that technology. I mean, the 20 years, 25 years I've been in technology, the best usually partner with others that are the best, right? You don't want to try to take it all on yourself. So I definitely see that as becoming a really great model in the future where hey, build your core application, and for the governance component of it, just go partner with Samata, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we want. Yeah, we want the best and the brightest with all the things that they're doing, and we love partnering, we love the idea. As I said earlier, it's pointless if nobody uses it, right?
Yeah.
So the more people use it, the more it grows, and it
Yeah.
gets better over time. Yes, it's very important. So I don't want to go into mathematics. I'll leave that up to my co-founder, who is a mathematician. I'm only a lowly economist and lawyer. So the more people use it, the better it gets.
Yeah.
The more precedent sets, the more solutions are being created in this platform, right? It's a sort of self-reinforcing structure. And so we can't do it without you guys. It's that simple.
Yeah. And it's kind of a segue, and I don't want to get distracted a little bit too much, but when you talk about the more people use it and gaining critical mass, that's the way, by the way, total side into the weeds, but that's where I think how true AI is going to spring out of existence. It's going to coalesce out of all these different systems interacting, and eventually it's going to be so complex that it mimics some kind of a neural system of nature. So,
yeah.
But that's totally unrelated.
And no, this is we've been thinking in this way for a long time. That there are of course problems with that because you don't have a backstop necessarily for that AI evolution, right? People have certain ideas about this, but so reputation verification can be one of those backstops. So there are IoT solutions in AI.
Very good point.
And we are just starting to scratch the surface, of course, because we're still worried about sort of the core intellectual foundation for this. But I mean, what you mentioned is exactly right. Yeah. So how do you create in an AI future that ethics backstop?
Yeah.
By the way, that can be machines or humans, right?
Right.
So that doesn't just mean that you get a reputation verification in a system like Samata done by humans. It can also be based on machines.
You don't know. Right? It's completely anonymous, right? Yes. You don't know if it's a person or a machine.
You only have the reputation scoring. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So yeah, I mean, this is a bright future all around.
It's a brave new world. Wes, you got anything else for us before we wrap up?
No, just to your guys' point. I mean, I love this space. I mean, the blockchain really lends itself to collaboration amongst, industry participants, and the open source environment kind of fosters innovation, I think. And now there's ways to incentivize, open source developers to continue to progress in the space and better the overall technology. So I think it's amazing. I think it's just an amazing technology, and I love being a part of it.
Well, maybe we can, since you're already, your brain is already almost 100% decentralized, Wes, maybe we can have you open up the Southern California chapter of...
Well, the thing is, I think, bridging the gap between the two worlds, because I think they're going to exist, they're going to coexist for a long time. I don't think there's going to be mass adoption, within the next 5, 10, 15 years. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I can only speculate, but I think these two worlds they're going to be people that want to live exclusively in a centralized intermediary, trusted intermediary that they trust. I mean, grandma's not going to go and jump on blockchain and start, doing her, paying bills with cryptocurrency, unless other people do it, I guess. But I mean, they're going to go to their bank. They'll have their teller that they like. They're going to deal with these people, these intermediaries that they like. And they're going to be people who are going to be completely the opposite. They're going to be solely living in this decentralized world, and still obviously having to pay taxes in an old world. But there's obviously mechanisms to prevent people really knowing how much you're earning and what your assets are. And they're going to be people gaming the system. So bridging the two worlds, I think, is going to be, really a lawyer's going to play that role in bridging the two worlds together, kind of figuring out that happy medium. But we'll see. I mean, like I said, it's an interesting space. I'm not entirely decentralized. I think there's I mean, I work in this world, I work in the real world that we live in right now, but I'm trying to figure out a way to bridge that gap between the two worlds.
Great.
Thank you.
One last thing as well. I know that you've got a project coming to list, I think, rank cryptocurrencies somehow. You've got some folks working on something.
Token models, yeah. We're trying. I'm still kind of wrap my head around the fact that there's almost no literature on crypto economics that's at an academic level. So we are coding the top 100 by market cap in their token models, consensus algorithm among various other metrics. And we're trying to get sort of a time series sense of what has evolved, why have these token models evolved, what do they mean, how do they work, and where's this going? And we're also, and this is something you mentioned, net realizable value.
Yeah. Well, that to me, I think, is much more substantial than, say, market cap, right?
Absolutely. So how do you discount market cap?
Yeah.
So
how much of that is hype, right?
Yeah. So what we're doing, and I have 4 wonderful research assistants, amazing people. And so what we're doing now is we're taking, so there are no mandatory disclosures in crypto right now.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of people have said, the S1, which is the IPO registration statement that you have to file with the SEC, we have to create a sort of an S1 equivalent for crypto at some point. And well, we don't have it. Then various folks, William Mogadar and a bunch of others have said, we're going to do self-disclosures, right? So, but the only real self-disclosure we have so far is the white paper and miscellaneous stuff, right?
So that's usually used to raise funds, so it's usually all marketing hype, right? And not a real representation of what gets implemented.
That's exactly right. And so what we're doing is we're taking that white paper and we're saying, hey, here are the metrics of things that they should disclose, that they should tell us. Now, of course, you're not going to tell in a private sale the same thing in your white paper as you would tell in a public sale, right? So we're discounting and adjusting for that. But what we're doing is we're creating metrics of, here are the things that you should be disclosing. If you are disclosing that, your NRV, net realizable value, is higher.
Okay. So
if you're not disclosing that, your net realizable value is lower. So if you're disclosing all the metrics that we think should be the equivalent of an S1 disclosure in that space, we're giving you 100%, which is market cap.
Okay.
But if you don't, then we're discounting and we're creating metrics and sort of baskets of discounting, given the lacking disclosure that these folks are providing.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting approach. So when are you expecting that list to be published?
So we will present at Tulip because this is in 2 weeks. So we'll probably do sort of the basics and concept, and I expect this to come out in about maybe 2 months or so.
Okay.
2 or 3 months. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of Tulip, looking forward to seeing you there in a couple of weeks. So we'll see you in San Francisco. Want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And
always good to see you guys.
Wes, great you could join us again for this one. So.
Well, thank you, Wulf. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Wes.
And for the audience, I'll post links to Wulf's website and his contact information, at least publicly available in the comments below. So,
thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.